So I played off against 4,000 points of Imperial Fists Bolters, Blades and an Imperial Knight, and I lived to tell the tale. So, full disclosure, I have played a lot of Horus Heresy 3rd edition. I've run a ton of newer players through 1,500 point introductory games, the smaller size helping them to acclimatise to the rules without too many moving parts going on. I've played a lot of 2,000 point games as well, which have always ended up with massively enormous impressive looking armies on both sides. And a small amount of those games have been at 3,000 points, which I think most Heresy players would agree is the standard size of Heresy game. But I've yet to play a really big game of Horus Heresy 3.0. You know the games I mean. The games where the deployment zones are simply chocked full of troops and heavy armour. Every shooting phase is a typhoon of explosives and bolter shells, and any assault that happens is always absolutely devastating. Well, enter my mate, Cam. Cam is probably the person I've played Horus Heresy against the most across any edition. My 14th Legion and his 7th Legion are well entrenched enemies at this point. I would say that Cam's Imperial Fists are my Legion's arch nemesis, which I think in Horus Heresy terms means that Cam's my best Heresy buddy. And in 2nd edition, we played some ludicrously huge games. We played at 3,000 points, we played at 4,000 points, we even played at 5,000 points. Not to mention seeing off 2nd edition with a multiplayer, multi-table, colossal siege game, which easily had 10,000 points aside. Yeah, it's safe to say we're both fans of Big Heresy. So it was only natural that eventually in 3rd edition both Cam and I would up the ante in terms of game size. And naturally we agreed to a 4,000 point game, and each scampered off to produce a suitably enormous list. Now before we go any further, there are a few things you should know about Cam. He likes bolters, he likes autocannons, he likes big shields, and he likes Kratoses. If there is a position he can defend, he will defend it. If there's a wall, he will stand in it and he will hold it. And if there's a chance that he can take a Cerastus Knight with twin bolt cannon and Tempest Warblade, then god damn it, he's gonna take it. We both agreed that Cam could bring his exceptionally well painted knight to the game. And to make things even, I would bring a Lord of War as well. Cam intended to bring his trademark 2 Kratoses, 1 anti-tank, 1 anti-infantry, and a veritable wall of Imperial Fists infantry, pardon the pun. And when I was building my list for this game, I wanted it to be a dramatic counterpoint to this list. So we'll kick off the 4,000 points with my primary Crusade detachment. We'll start with a high command, which is Commander Ahab Aldrich, known to his men as the Titan Reaper. He's a Legion Praetor in Saturnine armour, armed with a Plasma Blaster and a Saturnine War Scythe, also known as a Saturnine Concussion Hammer. He's supported by 2 command choices, the first being Siegebreaker Consul Athelion, the Ender of Ways, who is a Siegebreaker, armed with an Alchem Caster, Melta Bombs, a Thunder Hammer, and he has a logistical benefit. I'll also be taking along Centurion Isambard, who is a Forge Lord, who is armed with a Thunderhammer, a Machinator Array, and a Cyber Familiar. Using the Siegebreaker's logistical benefit, I'll be taking the Day of Tears and Mourning, an 11-man Mortis Poisoner squad, all armed with Alchem Flamers, and the Sergeant has a Flamer and a Phosphex Bomb. They also feature a Nuncio Vox. I'll be taking 3 tactical squads, Squad Gamma, mounted in a Rhino, Squad Theta, also mounted in a Rhino, and finally Squad Iota, also mounted in a Rhino. My first auxiliary detachment will be an Armoured Fist detachment, and I'll be taking 3 heavy transports, the first being For Whom the Bell Tolls, a Land Raider carrier covered in last cannons and with a multi-melta pinto mountain. My second heavy transport will be Curse You All Men, a second Land Raider carrier, this one with a twin heavy flamer and a pinto mounted heavy flamer as well. And my final heavy transport will be the Iron Vestry, a Spartan assault tank, armed with a pinto mounted heavy flamer and last cannon arrays. I'll also be taking an armoured support detachment, and this will feature 1 tank, an Arquador Bombard tank armed with Phosphex shells. My final detachment will be the Death Guard specific detachment, the Reaping Host. My first selection will be Squad Epsilon, a Breacher squad armed with a Lascutter, the Sergeant with a Power Fist, featuring a Vexilla and a Nuncio Vox, and they will also be unlocking a logistical benefit. The second choice will be the Chem Bombardment Battery, 2 rapier platforms armed with quad launchers and phosphex shells. And I'll also be taking 2 heavy assault choices, the first one being Harbinger Squad, a destroyer assault squad armed with hand flamers and 2 destroyer missile launchers. I will also be taking a full 10-man Grave Warden squad known as the Tall Grasses to act as a bodyguard for my Praetor. They will all have chain fists and one of them will be armed with a heavy Alchem Flamer. And finally, to top off the list, I'll be taking a Lord of War, a Typhon heavy siege tank known as the Mors Ultra, armed with a Dreadhammer siege cannon and last cannon sponsons. This list is a real evolution of the list that I've been playing most lately, where everything is mounted in a vehicle and stabs forward supported by the Land Raiders. And I was hoping that with so much artillery backing it up I would punch a hole through whatever assault Cam could throw my way. Thus, the War Master commands Mortarion to hold this sector against the Imperial Fists assault. The 7th Legion, meanwhile, with a noble knight ally, seek to punch a hole through the Death Guard in order to assault the War Master's lines. It was going to be an exceptionally bloody affair. The day of the battle, we launched straight into it, with me losing the initial roll-off and both deploying first and also taking the first turn. We used the Liber Objectum, with Cam choosing the mission and me choosing the deployment zones. The mission was hold all quarters. The board is split into 4 equal quarters with an objective marker placed at the centre of each quarter. Each objective is worth 2 points. However, if either player holds 3 or more in the victory phase, then they'll be worth 4 points each, essentially doubling the amount of points that can be scored. So a player could rely on playing defensively and just accruing score over time, or go big and charge into the enemy zone to try and accrue a big amount of points in a single turn. A real big risk, big reward kind of play. I decided that with so many tanks and transports on my list, I would go with the latter. I chose Clash of the Line for deployment, meaning the objectives would be close at hand but still require movement in the first turn to secure. My deployment was a literal arrowhead, all focused around the Iron Vestry Spartan, flanked by the Land Raiders and backed by my Rhino teams and artillery. My destroyers set up amongst the tanks, aiming to fly into cover when the battle began and to try and get their rad missiles into as many enemy squads as possible. Cam's deployment, meanwhile, was a deeply intimidating sight. 2 Kratoses flanking the Knight, surrounded by hordes of golden armoured Imperial Fists, all behind 2 squads of Tartaros Terminators. I've played Cam a lot in the past, and this was perhaps his most intimidating deployment that I'd ever seen. I would need to be chucking out the artillery and the phosphex in droves to even cut a swathe through that amount of infantry. And I also had to deal with the deluge that the Kratoses and the Knight would be hurling my way to do it. This was going to be brutal. Turn 1. I pushed all my armour steadily forward, trying to maintain some form of coherency in the line. I figured if I presented a wall of armour 14, there was a high probability of my tank surviving. 2 of the Rhinos dropped their tactical squad at my home objectives, while both the Mors Ultra and my Arquiter edged forward to draw better lines of fire. I had surprisingly few shots on my end, with the Typhon decimating 2 Terminators in the enemy commander's bodyguard, while the Arquiter dropped heavy munitions on the despoilers and autocannons for another few kills. My other tanks peppered the enemy lines with last cannons and shrapnel for a few kills here or there, but nothing I would consider impactful. The Spartan, however, trained its batteries on an enemy Rhino hovering in the shadow of the right-hand Kratos and peppered it with a barrage of laser fire, destroying it completely and forcing the Melta squad within to run from the burning wreckage. My Rhino, armed with a Havoc launcher, also peppered the enormous tactical squad with shells, stunning them. If I'm honest, this was a pretty disappointing first turn for me. Cam's army was just so big and with so many threatening aspects that I just didn't know where to focus my fire, and so I split fire everywhere and it proved to be wildly ineffective. I had scored first strike at least. If your enemy's got a Rhino that you can see, then you're always going to score first strike. I'd also scored my 2 home objectives, scoring me 11 points in the first turn, and my Legion braced itself for the inevitable barrage of bolters that was to come. With a bellow from its warhorn, the Knight Cerastus charged forward while the fists around it flowed into a well-drilled and disciplined battle line. A tactical squad rushed forward from the left-hand Rhino, claiming an objective on open ground, while the champion led his despoilers to claim another. The Centurion also got his men back under control thanks to the squad's Nuncio Vox and led them to support their armour. Cam's shooting was absolutely devastating. The Knight drew a bead on my right-hand tactical squad, its bolt cannon spraying the area with enormous high explosive shells capable of punching clean through Astartes power armour. I was forced to use my Barbarian Resilience reaction to keep the squad alive, and after the smoke cleared, half the squad lay broken in the cratered mud. My destroyers came under a huge amount of fire from the enemy's flank, the squad being decimated despite the cover they hid in. Only the sergeant and one of his missile troopers remained after the bombardment, yet held despite the gruesome casualties. A long-range firefight broke out between the 7th Legion autocannon squad and my rapier teams, with the sheer weight of fire from the fists absolutely annihilating both platforms, their crews and the siegebreaker who led them. In one fell swoop, Cam had killed a significant section of my command and firepower, and he was nowhere near done yet. The worst, I realised, had not even occurred yet. He had deployed his Melta Kratos directly ahead of my Typhon, its gunners setting their sights on the Death Guard Super Heavy. A piercing whine rose from the tank's batteries as they funneled killing energy into the Melta blast gun. With a roar, it fired, its beam hitting the Typhon squarely in the barrel, igniting its ammo stores and decimating the armoured giant. The Kratos killed my Typhon with one round of firing. This was devastating. I had lost my Super Heavy in turn 1, leaving a huge hole in my line and removing a massive amount of firepower on my end. Oh sweet Typhon, you were too young for this world. What's even worse is that the Typhon could do absolutely nothing to avoid this. Super Heavies can only use reactions against other Super Heavies, Knights and Paragon units, and the pilot of the Typhon clearly didn't see any threat from the Kratos whatsoever, therefore meaning I couldn't even pop smoke to try and avoid the Melta shot. With both a brilliant bit of deployment and some really good shooting, Cam had really hit me hard in the first turn. Cam had equalised, scoring both his objectives and scoring first strike on my rapier teams, but he could add an additional point for Giant Killer as well, and was now winning 12 points to 11. We were only entering turn 2 and already I was feeling the pressure. In turn 2, I pushed forward aggressively yet again, but my Spartan now had to head to the other flank to plug the gap left by the Typhon. My Arquiter would now need to do all the heavy lifting in terms of long-range artillery, and so moved behind the safety of For Whom the Bell Tolls, the Land Raider's heavier armour providing some sanctuary. My Rhinos also speared forward, looking to bring their close-range weapons to bear and harass the enemy lines. My depleted destroyers meanwhile also launched forward, keen to make some limited impact despite their depleted numbers. The assault ramp of the Iron Vestry opened and Commander Ahab Aldrich led the Tall Grasses, a 10-man Grave Warden squad, onto the field, his sights set on the enemy lines. On the other flank, Curse You All Men also deployed its ramp, and from the choking smog of its radiation-bathed inside stormed the Day of Tears and Mourning, the elite poisoners keen to set the enemy squads alight in alchemical death. Cam reacted quickly, pulling his tacticals back from the objective to stop me scoring Vanguard, with the Grave Wardens bombarding the retreating Marines in a hail of chemical explosives, killing the majority of them and routing them in panic. Meanwhile, the Iron Vestry and For Whom the Bell Tolls trained every weapon system on the Kratos, pummeling the heavy tank with laser fire, scoring several hull points before the 7th Legion Decurion Locust locked its main gun onto the Spartan, destroying the venerable tank with a wall of las and Melta fire. My Arquiter had no targets in range of its Phosphex munitions, so lobbed a high explosive shell towards the enemy despoilers, violently killing several of them with an enormous explosion. Cam's Praetor, upon seeing the poisoners deploy from their Land Raider, used the Imperial Fist's unique reaction to unleash a wall of storm bolters and autocannon shots into the poisoners, killing half with a flurry of explosive shells. The poisoners in return bathed the area in alchemical death, catching both the Terminators and Despoilers in the horrendous firestorm. A Terminator fell, mouth foaming and bones melting, and several Despoilers burned in their armour, causing their comrades to panic amid the horror of the Death Guard assault. The Rhino once again drew a bead on the large tactical squad and fired a Havoc shell, once again stunning the huge squad, much to Cam's annoyance. With a bellow of rage, Commander Aldrich led the Grave Wardens in a charge against the Kratos, while the Poisoners hurled themselves into the already panicked Despoilers. The chain fists of the Terminators hacked and sawed into the heavy tank, the Death Guard pulling the crew from the wreck and hacking them into pieces in revenge for the Typhon and Spartan. The Poisoners' chainswords sang, killing several of the Despoilers and forcing the squad to flee at the assault, Cam's champion roaring in fury for his men to stand their ground. The victorious Death Guard consolidated into the enemy objectives, holding all four at the same time.
This was huge, meaning I scored 6 points for each of my home objectives, 4 points for the Poisoner's objective, and 1 point for the Grave Wardens due to their Vanguard rule. This was a devastating additional 17 points and took the score to 28 to 12. I needed to hold Cam on his lines and deny him from scoring more than 2 objectives in order to secure victory. Cam's turn 2 saw the Fists commander utilise their expansive Nuncio Vox network to bring their troops back into cohesion before forming a new wall of unyielding yellow armour. Squads charged back towards the objectives, aware that the Death Guard were suddenly on the offensive. The Knight set its sights on Commander Aldrich, keen to pit itself against such a worthy adversary, with a squad of Assault Terminators swarming behind it in support. The Grave Wardens reacted backward, knowing they could not avoid the Knight, but hoping to at least make the Terminator's charge more difficult. With a contemptuous flash of fire, the Knight annihilated one of my tactical squads, while the Praetor led his flank in destroying both the Poisoners and Destroyer squads. A wall of plasma and autocannon fire enveloped the Rhinos, destroying one and ruining the tracks of another, pinning it and its attendant squad in place. The 7th Legion Praetor raised his sword and charged with his Terminators into Curse You All Men, while the Knight and Assault Terminators rammed into the Grave Wardens. The Cerastus struck at the Death Guard, cleaving 2 of the Cataphracti in half, before the Assault Terminators pulled down another. However, Ahab Aldrich is known as the Titan Reaper for a reason, and ordered his squad to focus all their fury on the Knight. Chain fists cut through leg armour and servos, causing the giant machine to fall. Aldrich raised his heavy war scythe and beheaded the ancient machine, before punching through its armour to yank out its screaming pilot. With a twist of his disruption fist, he snapped the neck of the Knight pilot, claiming his skull for the Death Lord. However, the Grave Wardens, seeing the danger their lord was in, now routed and dragged him away from the enemy Tartaros, leaving them to consolidate around the objective. The Fist Praetor ordered his Terminators forward, chain fists also roaring, and while they scored many deep gouges in the armour of the Death Guard Land Raider, they failed to destroy it, presenting a potential danger to their flank. At the end of the turn, Cam had lost his Knight and failed to secure his flank completely, but reclaimed both his home objectives. This added 8 to his total, bringing the scoreboard to 29-20, with me scoring an additional point for felling a Lord of War.
Even at this point, things were still way too close to call.
My forces were badly depleted, and I needed to contain Cam on his side of the board if I was to stand any chance of winning. Both the Land Raiders speared forward, Curse You All Men bodily ramming Terminators into the mud as it ground forward, while the heavy flamer Rhino charged through my fleeing Grave Wardens. My Forge Lord Isambard led the Breachers from their Land Raider, intent on removing the enemy tactical squad, while my own tactical squad jumped from the beleaguered Rhino and made for their home field objective. Cam responded by pulling his diminished tacticals back, denying the Forge Lord the ability to charge them. In the chaos of the fighting though, the Arquitor had now entered Warcrime range and fired a Phosphex munition into the despoilers, covering them in crawling fire and choking miasma, many of them screaming in pain as their apothecary tried desperately to save them. Curse You All Men split fire with all of its weapons, intent on causing as much mayhem as it could before its inevitable destruction. Flamers bathed Marines in fire, while last cannons punched Astartes from their feet with burning holes in their chests. Cam reacted with his Melta squad, who although routed from the assault, were able to return fire and kill the radiation-soaked tank. The pinned Rhino meanwhile launched Havoc shells at the depleted tactical squad, stunning them and proving why Havoc launchers are maybe a wee bit too effective for their points cost. Finally, Ahab was able to pull his Grave Wardens together, intent now on a new prize, the head of the enemy Praetor.
Cam's army still wildly outnumbered me at this point, so I could only hope that the statuses I had inflicted upon him would actually do something in his turn. But his Nuncio Vox network had proved annoyingly effective up until this point. As mentioned, Nuncio Voxes are absolutely amazing, and if you can take them, you should take them. Statuses can absolutely ruin your day in Heresy if you aren't prepared for them.
The Imperial Fists Vox network crackled with new orders, the fists falling immediately in line as their commanders rallied them to full effectiveness once more. The Imperial Fists followed the doctrine of Rogo Dorn to a T and immediately formed a new wall of armour in Astartes, keen to repulse the Death Guard's probing attacks. However, the movement of the Praetor and his supporting squads was noticed by Commander Aldrich, who reacted closer to the enemy line, keen to draw fire from his forces and cross blades with the Imperial Fists commander. The majority of the Fist's fire fell upon the breachers, who although hidden behind heavy shields were massacred to a man, leaving only the Forge Lord to stand alone against the inevitable assault to come. Fire from the Kratos and support squads fell upon the Grave Wardens, but the tough plate of the Cataphracti warded off all incoming damage. Ahab raised his scythe toward the enemy commander, daring him to come fight him personally. However, the only assault that occurred was the Terminators into the Forge Lord, who barreled into the lone Astartes, cutting and stabbing him into a bloody pile in the pock-marked ground. They then consolidated to once again defend their main objective. With his home field objective secure once more, Cam scored another 8 points, bringing the score to 35 to 28. A big play in turn 4 would see Cam clinch the game, so I had to do something spectacular to stop him.
So I had set myself 2 objectives going into turn 4. Stop Cam moving deeper towards my objectives, and kill the enemy Praetor. Slay the Warlord is only worth 1 point in this particular mission, but I thought it was massively thematic for my Praetor to want to cut the head off the enemy force, particularly in revenge for all the damage the Imperial Fists had done to them. Plus, challenges are always amazing, particularly between high command units.
To that end, both the remaining functional Land Raider and Rhino surrounded his Terminators and Tacticals, while Ahab and the Grave Wardens surged towards the enemy Praetor and his Terminators. Seeing its commander's intent, the Arquitor dropped Phosphex shells onto the Praetor's unit, melting several Terminators and prompting a Panic 3 check at the end of the phase. The Grave Wardens also switched ammo to crack grenades and showered the Terminators in a brutal hail of close-range explosive death, killing another 3. The deluge was too much even for these elite warriors, who routed, the Praetor trying in vain to keep his men in line. The Land Raider pelted the enemy Rhino with Melta and Last Fire, removing Cam's last fast unit from the game and ensuring he remained on this side of the battlefield. Meanwhile, the immobilised Rhino fired more explosive Havoc rounds into the despoilers, stunning the unit and potentially denying Cam a last turn objective. Seeing his counterpart in disarray, Ahab raised his concussion scythe and roared for his Grave Wardens to charge. The massive Astartes barreled forward, firing grenades as they went, the rounds punching another Imperial Fist from his feet. With the sound of an avalanche, the 2 lines of Terminators met violently, chain fists revving and power weapons sparking. Ahab cackled a challenge to the Imperial Fist Praetor, who raised his shield and Paragon Blade and thundered into the massive Saturnine Warlord in response. They traded blows back and forth, but the skill of the Imperial Fist could not penetrate the hulking Saturnine plate of his opponent. Ahab brought his scythe down again and again, shattering first the shield arm of his opponent, then his sword arm. The Imperial Fist fell to his knees, fury in his eyes. Ahab gestured to the scrum around them as the Grave Wardens cleaved apart the panicking Tartaros Terminators. This, my friend, is the fate that awaits all enemies of the War Master. With a final staggering blow, Ahab brought his scythe down on the Praetor's head, crushing him utterly. The Grave Wardens mopped up the survivors before falling back to their own lines.
My final turn finished with me scoring both of my objectives and slay the Warlord to boot. I was feeling good.
Knowing there was little he could do to plug the gap, Cam's last turn saw all his forces pour fire into the Grave Wardens, hoping to at least avenge their commander. Whilst most of the hulking Terminators fell, Ahab Aldrich survived, ordering his units to withdraw, their mission accomplished. As the gunfire stopped, we tallied the final score. Cam scored another 8 on his home objectives and easily claimed last man standing for a final 3, bringing the final score to 39 to 44. Although they had utterly devastated the traitors, the Fists had failed to break through the Death Guard's lines and had lost not only their commander, but a venerable allied knight as well. The Death Guard meanwhile had served their War Master well, but had suffered appalling casualties in doing so. This is a tale told again, again and again in the Age of Darkness.
What a game! Absolutely nail-biting until the very end. And I think it really highlights how diverse approaches to the game are equally as viable. Cam's army showed that enormous squads are massively survivable and can lay down a horrific amount of fire, but they are a bit unwieldy to move, can't be mounted easily into transports, and are very easy to hit, particularly with status-inflicting weapons. I see you Havoc launchers, I know what you're doing. My force, meanwhile, was much more mobile, making attacking and scoring much easier. But my smaller squads got absolutely chewed up by Cam shooting turn after turn after turn. Not to mention the sheer lethality of his return fire, particularly with his Kratos. Note to self, do not shoot a Kratos with a Decurion, it will simply be embarrassing for you. Oh Spartan Assault Tank, you were too young for this world. And Lords of War do have the potential to be absolutely game-changing when they're deployed, but both of us took fairly hard counters to each and it ended up just being embarrassing. My Typhon killed literally 2 Terminators before it was destroyed, and Cam's Knight managed to kill a tactical squad before being cut down by my Warlord and the Grave Wardens. Whilst I do think Lords of War have the potential to be game-altering forces, I think they definitely need careful deployment and protecting in the game. So, does Horus Heresy 3.0 work at larger scales? Absolutely, 100%. We glided through the game in just over 3 hours, with only a few hiccups here or there with us forgetting to do morale tests at specific points, but I think that was more us being excited about playing such a big game than any issue with the rules at all. Otherwise though, this felt like a Heresy game with a capital H. It was fun, it looked bloody amazing, and it definitely makes me hungry for a rematch at 5,000 points next time. Horus Heresy is awesome because of opponents like Cam, and because having 8,000 points of models on the table at the same time is absolutely bloody amazing. Thanks for watching.